When people think of Metroidvania games, they usually think of games that make up the term, both Metroid and Castlevania. According to a quick Google search I did, most people have said that games like Metroid, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, along with other games like Blasphemous and Hollow Knight, were their entry to the genre. I'm here to say that I didn't play any of those games until later in my life. My first introduction to the genre is an underrated DS game known as Monster Tale. After playing it in my early childhood, I finally found the game again and played it once again. But that's enough gushing over an 11-year-old game. I'm Vivix Tales, this is Backlog Worthy, let's talk about Monster Tale. There are a few different things that contribute to why Monster Tale is underrated. The only reason I knew that Monster Tale existed back in 2011 was because of a cardboard standee in the corner of my local GameStop. Other than that, I personally do not remember any sort of advertising for this game. Out of everyone that I brought this game up to, only one person knew what I was even talking about. Another reason might be the companies associated with Monster Tale. It was developed by Dreamrift and published by Majesco. It might not have helped that Dreamrift only made one other game, which was Disney's epic Mickey Power of Illusion. But that's a topic for another video. Who would have thought that I was going to start with Monster Tale's music? Now, I understand that this is pretty much a kid's game, but I really don't think that it excuses the lack of good music. With there only being 31 tracks in the soundtrack, it's a little sad that only a handful of them are great. The rest of them are really just mediocre. It's really just the fact that the music does little to nothing to make it stand out. Instead of the background music working with the gameplay or art style, it's more like elevator music. It's just there to help pass the time. This is something new, but let's talk about level design in Monster Tale. Weirdly enough, level design is probably the biggest part of a Metroidvania game. When it comes to this game, the level design is honestly not the best either. When you think of a Metroidvania game, you might think of a convoluted map layout with a bunch of backtracking. Monster Tale does not do that though. In this game, you go as far left as you are able to go, and then turn around and go as far right as you are able to go. At that point, the player will be more than likely to find a ability, and the cycle starts all over again. There's only so much I can talk about when it comes to the graphics of a DS game, but I'll try. The graphics in Monster Tale would be best described as kid-like. I'm not saying this is a bad thing though. This cute and colorful world makes sense when you're playing as a kid in a world ruled by kids. Besides that point, I really enjoyed the pixel art, but there's nothing too much to talk about after that. The mechanics in Monster Tale is something that I really liked. The main thing I want to talk about is the idea behind your monster friend Chomp. This little monster of yours utilizes both the top and bottom screens of the DS. On the top screen, Chomp will attack enemies and activate mechanisms automatically, while on the bottom screen, Chomp will interact with items, which we'll talk about in a minute, as well as attacking enemies. Items are capable of doing two things, causing something to happen on the top screen, or increasing a specific stat of Chomp's. If Chomp interacts with something like a soccer ball, when he's done with it, it will launch towards the top screen and bounce around while damaging enemies. Besides that, there might be a possibility that a gate is blocking your way on the top screen. You can tap the bottom on that touchscreen, and Chomp will smack it open. Let's talk about that stat thing that I briefly mentioned, because I believe that is the best thing about Chomp. If you increase these stats, which consist of attack, defense, speed, and intelligence, Chomp will evolve in one way or another. This little monster has an evolution tree that you can jump throughout as much as you please. If that's not enough for you, there are actually 3 different evolutionary trees to choose from. It's broken up into 3 different categories: child, teenager, and adult. Each evolution has its own pros and cons, so pick wisely. Finally, let's talk about the main course of Monster Tale, the story. You play as a young girl named Ellie, who is transported to a world where kids rule over monsters. After finding Chomp, your main goals are to return this newfound world to its inhabitants, as well as finding a way back to your own world. To do this, Ellie has to defeat the Kid Kings in order to end their rule. Sadly, that's about it when it comes to the story. I might be wrong about this, but I kinda blame it on being a bit of a smaller game. Monster Tale has a special place in my heart, being one of my favorite games from my childhood. For the score, I'd have to give it a 7 out of 10. As much as I really did enjoy the game, it did have a few too many shortcomings for me. Monster Tale is now a game that you've hopefully heard of, so I'd say throw it in your backlog, and maybe even play it.